So a bit further here in the last segment of today's broadcast, all of these coal deposits were within a radius of 30 miles of its plant in Birmingham, Alabama. The owners of this company were planning improvements which would have made it an even more serious competitor of the Steel Trust, and they had plans underway of merging the Republic Steel Company with their corporation. Moreover, the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company was foremost in the development of the open hearth system of making steel rails. Its rails were in greater demand and brought higher prices than those of the Steel Trust, and buddy, that's dangerous. In the difficult financial position of the Trust Company of America, the Morgan interests saw their great opportunity of eliminating the competition of the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company to prevent itself going into bankruptcy. The Trust Company of America, you could call that the Bank of America, needed large and immediate amounts of cash, which was scarce. Morgan and his clique had the cash. The condition insisted upon by Morgan was that the company should sell him the stock of the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company that it was holding as collateral for loans. Hard-pressed, the Trust Company of America had to yield and sell the stock at a low price offered. The next move was to make the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company a part of the Steel Trust. There was, however, an obstacle. The federal antitrust law prohibited such combinations. How could this situation be overcome? President Theodore Roosevelt was incessantly and gustily threatening the great magnates with the enforcement of his law. But apparently, Morgan knew Roosevelt much better than the country knew him. He undoubtedly reckoned that Roosevelt's talks were mere words, and that Roosevelt would prove his subservience anew in acts. The report went that Morgan, through emissaries sent to the White House, informed Roosevelt that unless the merger of the two steel companies were allowed by the government, the Trust Company of America would go down in failure, causing a train of other bankruptcies, and the panic would be intensified manifold. Sound familiar to anyone besides me? Benjamin Shalom Bernanke. Give us this money or the whole place is going to hell in a handbasket. Sound familiar? Whatever were the reasons for Roosevelt's submission, he gave his consent. At that very time, the courts were enforcing the antitrust law with a construction that no one had dreamed of when the law was passed. The eminent judges discovered that labor unions were trusts and issued writs against them on the ground that they were conspiracies in defiance of that law. Roosevelt was bitterly denounced. His action, however, mattered little so far as the merging of the two corporations were concerned. Had not the Steel Trust obtained control at that particular time, it would have inevitably done so on another day, by another process. It continues, and it continues, and it continues. Amazing. I'm resisting mightily the desire to play Happy Trails at the close of today's broadcast. I think I'll pass on that. But I do remember Derry Brownfield, this broadcast. He had a great influence on me. He was a wonderful man, and he will be missed by all of us that knew him and listened to his broadcast. Continuing, these and other not less persuasive arguments and precedents combine to afford the promoters of the great industrial combinations a sense of legal security from which they were rudely jostled by the decision dissolving the Northern Securities Company in 1904. Now back to this Encyclopedia of Social Sciences. And it cites case law there that maybe we'll look at in the future. The illusion had lasted long enough, however, in conjunction with complacency or discouragement in the Attorney General's office to permit that wave of comprehensive corporate combination which took place around the turn of the century and gave to American industry its characteristic 20th century concentration of control, which, by the way, has not diminished one iota. There had been organized in many of the mass production industries amalgamated enterprises of outstanding size, not usually indeed capable by themselves of controlling the market, but easily able to exert a sufficient pressure upon so-called independents to ensure that their market leadership would be followed. And from this, of course, we can get involved with holding companies and how you don't need necessarily control all of an industry. You just have to control a share in enough companies that are ancillary to that industry, that if all of those companies balk at a particular move or a combination or a distribution, that you have essentially gained monopoly almost by default through holding companies. We studied that when we were looking at Dillevu and Howard's Principles of Business Law. So anyway, so much more on that. In this way, they were undoubtedly modified the play of competitive forces, if indeed they did not become the nuclei of clandestine cartels. The most spectacular combination of the period was the formation in 1901 of the United States Steel Corporation, capitalized at more than $1 billion. And think about that now in silver. How many ounces of silver would you have to have in those days? It'd be 1 billion. How many ounces of gold? That was at a time when $1 billion really meant something, kind of comparable to trillions today. It is not difficult to list reasons for the timing and the extent of this movement, although the relative importance of the causes is impossible of statement. The legal situation was presumptively favorable to corporate combinations and not to cartelization. So once again, we take a look at this idea, this notion, the 3 E's of sustainable development, these 3 interlocking circles. Of course, the first one is economy. Economy. Money. Money, 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 money. The second one is environment. I always bring that one in, the environment. And the third one, of course, is equity. It's interesting, you know, equity. An equitable title on your property. It's well worth looking into. Equity is a peculiar thing. And remember, the equity courts was where, you know, you would basically go when there was no law. And you'd make an appeal in equity. But equity has much to do with property ownership and the obfuscation of property ownership. How would it be possible for the United Nations to come in and set up a national heritage area over 13 counties contiguous, and then begin to make rules and regulations as to how people are able to use or not use the land in those counties? Obviously, in the discussion, in the public meetings, someone ought to ask the question of who is the legal owner? Who has rights of possession here? Who has the equitable title here? Maybe if the people, these farmers and ranchers that turn out at the meetings, maybe if it was necessary for the change agents, the facilitators, the bronze men with the perfectly white bleached teeth and khaki garments, maybe if it was necessary for them to divulge to all of these stockmen and farmers and ranchers and property owners and householders that they didn't own their land, they'd never owned their land by way of this toxic currency, and that it was in fact the state that owned the land, and the state and the United Nations and the federal government had all gotten together and conspired against the people. Do you think that they might have a hard time leaving that sale barn with all those stockmen there that know how to deball a steer, you know, make a steer out of a bull calf? Men and women in the audience have pulled calves out of a cow in a snowstorm. You think those change agents would be able to get out of the room in those circumstances if they were to reveal the depth of the swindle and the fraud and the crimes that have been perpetrated against the people? And it's so interesting to go against property and property rights. But once people start to get the grasp, once they really start to get it in their mind, that our entire system here on this continent is based upon this idea of property. And if we can define property as a man's life and all non-procreative derivatives of his life, and that freedom is 100% control of that property, when the government comes to town to begin dictating how you're going to use your farms and your ranches, your intergenerational, your mineral wealth, and your timber, your cattle, imposing taxes willy-nilly left and right, maybe we'd start to see a little bit of an uprising in Missouri and in rural America comparable to what's going down in Wisconsin and the collectivists up there. Well, We're out of time for today. I'll be back again tomorrow. Until the next time,